Organizers in Chicago have announced they will also cancel next month's Women's March because they say they're worried about how many volunteers they will have and how much it will cost. And the marches aren't the only expensive political events right around the corner. As politicians start to announce their candidacies for the 2020 presidential election, cities are also vying for the chance to hold the nominating conventions. The RNC has already announced their 2020 convention will be held in Charlotte.
Milwaukee is one of the finalists to host the Democratic convention, but city officials are concerned about the potential price tag. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported last week the city wants to find a third party to guarantee a $10 million line of credit for the event if officials can't raise enough money to cover costs themselves. To talk more about this is Roger Fisk, the principal of New Day Strategy. He joins us from our Washington newsroom, and he worked on both of President Obama's election campaigns.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is something we rarely talk about that's real interesting and obviously will be hashed out in the coming months and year. What does a city need to pay to host a convention like this?
A lot. Hosting a convention for a city is kind of like what a funeral or a wedding is for a family. Basically, any dynamic that is out there is going to get multiple laps around the track. So if there's tensions with unions or police or labor or anything like that, that's going to be brought to a boil. When there's infrastructure costs that a lot of people don't really think through, when we hosted it in Boston in 2004, one of the first things we had to do to the arena was install, I think, 21 tons of steel just to support the lighting trusses. So there's major expenses tucked in here that are very difficult to anticipate. I think the best course of action for cities now is to make sure that hosting something like this is part of their broader economic development strategy and part of their broader marketing strategy so that they can be distilling value from this 3 and 4 and 5 years after they host something like this, because the costs are significant.
Yeah, I mean, the conventional wisdom was that cities wanted to host these events because I thought they brought in tourism and other sorts of benefits. Is that not the case?
They do. It definitely helps the service economy. I think since 9/11 especially, what you've seen is the security footprint tends to be so large nowadays that a lot of people in that city that run the dry cleaners and the diners and the small businesses look at the 7 to 10 days when there's going to be kind of a lockdown around the major arena and the major hotels that are going to be hosting all these folks, and just look at it and say, you know what, it's better to just leave town and see if we can rent our place out or something. But you're ending up seeing a lot of shutdown in those communities, so the capacity to really take advantage of that economic activity has that kind of effect as well.
This reminds me of the discussion over sports teams and the high price tag that is sometimes attached to a new stadium or whatever these teams want to keep the teams there. But people still want sports teams. People still want these conventions. How does this bid process work? How are the cities selected?
Usually it'll start with about 24 cities, and then the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee will have a small team of people that go out and look at it. What they're looking for is a combination of technological capacity, which would be things like how many runways are there on the airport, how many lanes are there on the highway, is there just the physical infrastructure to accommodate a massive influx of people, and then there's a narrative eye to it as well, which is, for example, the Democrats looking at Milwaukee right now. They obviously need to win Wisconsin back. So does the city contribute to a narrative? That's another question. So there's the infrastructure / bandwidth answer, and then there's what story does this city help us tell kind of component to it as well.
So, Roger, you've obviously done this before many times. What is your advice for some strategies that cities can implement to sort of help them make the most out of this?
Start preparing before you need to be ready. And I would actually, I think Brooke threw out the sports team situation. I would throw in there kind of the Amazon expansion or headquarters conversation, which is to say that when a city does like a 10-year economic development plan, that a major addendum of that should be, should we get the opportunity to host this? This is what we're willing to spend. These are the infrastructure improvements we're willing to make. This is the amount of debt we're willing to incur, etc. So that when an opportunity like this comes, it fits into a larger fabric of a larger economic design and a larger marketing plan as well. That's the best advice I could give to any cities right now.
And last thing, quickly, just so we understand, I presume the parties are also footing a lot of this bill, are they not?
The parties do foot some of it. They usually end up getting some kind of a block grant from the federal government that goes directly to security, because that's one of the things that always is double or triple what people anticipate. Once you deal with road closures and runways being frozen for the arrival of protectees and things like that, costs go through the roof. So that is definitely something that people need to think through and sit down and have long conversations with their police unions, their public employee unions and things like that, and try to exhaust as much of this as possible. There's always going to be surprises, but what you can try to do is reduce the numbers of surprises and reduce the price tag of those surprises.
Okay. Roger Fisk, we will look to see how it shakes out. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Brooke and Tanya.